All right, good
So,
afternoon and welcome to this afternoon's Mind Walk series. I'm going to go ahead and share our screen here. The Mind Walk program is underwritten by Thomas E. and Mary Kathryn Eltzroth, fund and supported by the Central Coast State Parks Association. I don't think I shared that, so let's go ahead and get that up there. All right. My name is Kristen, and I am really excited for today's program called Pismo Clam Potpourri. It's an overview of Pismo clam population and challenges with illegal harvest and prospects of this once iconic fishery returning to the Central Coast. So I'm going to introduce our two speakers today. We have Derek Stein, who has been with the Department of Fish and Wildlife since 2000 and with the Marine Region since 2005 as an environmental scientist in San Luis Obispo. He graduated at Humboldt State University and early in his career was involved with various salmon projects in Oregon and Northern California. In his first 5 years with the California Fish and Wildlife, he was involved with sonic telemetry migration studies in the Sacramento Delta and Chinook salmon striped bass and white sturgeon. His goal was always to work in marine fisheries and became an active department scuba diver, which he achieved in 2005. While at the Marine Region, he has worked on multiple abalone restoration research projects and has been heavily involved with California's dive fisheries, including sea cucumber and sea urchin. His work with clams and, of course, Pismo clams has been a recent interest, and he looks forward to a healthy, sustainable Pismo clam fishery returning to the Central Coast. Our second guest speaker today is Lieutenant Matt Gill, and he has been with the Department of Fish and Wildlife since 2010. He was born and raised on the Central Coast, where he attended Atascadero High School and Cal Poly. In 2010, he was assigned as the wildlife officer for the King City District located in South Monterey County. In 2018, he was promoted to the rank of Lieutenant Specialist and ran the North Coast District Volunteer Program. During that time, he started the department's first volunteer program in San Luis Obispo County. In 2019, he promoted to the rank of Lieutenant Supervisor and currently supervises both South Monterey and San Luis Obispo counties. Lieutenant Gill has taken a special interest in Pismo clams as the current rebounding population numbers have resulted in historic poaching numbers. His hope is to be able to stem the current poaching numbers to help allow for a sustainable fishery of legal-sized clams. I'm super excited for today's program, and I hope that you all enjoy today's discussion. I'll go ahead and hand it over to Derek.
there we go. Right, Kristen, it's good, right?
You're looking good.
Excellent. Apologize for the delay here. Had a little technical difficulties in the beginning there, and there we go. All right, thank you, Kristen. There we go. Thanks for giving me the opportunity, Matt, the opportunity to inviting us here for this lecture series. In recent years, we've had a huge spike in population at California beaches, and especially on the central coast of California here. However, most of the clams that we're seeing are very small and very young, and are many years from becoming big enough to legally take. Currently, the biggest threat, in my opinion, and a lot of people's opinion, is illegal take, which Matt will talk about in a lot more detail. First, I'd like to walk you through what I call Pismo Clam Potpourri, which is just a little bit of everything Pismo clams, including an overview of past and current Pismo clam populations, some biology, some life history, and the historic and current fishery. And we'll also briefly describe current research and new outreach activities we've implemented to help educate the public. The city of Pismo Beach and surrounding 5 cities area, Morro Bay, including Morro Bay, once had an amazing, iconic Pismo clam commercial and recreational fishery from the early 1900s and throughout the early and mid 1900s. This fishery brought in thousands of visitors to the area to harvest the clams, drive on the beach, which you still can. It's probably a pretty amazing time in history and a period where Pismo clam populations were plentiful. Pismo Beach was once known, and I guess still is when you drive through Pismo Beach, as the clam capital of the world, and for good reason. This photograph really makes me laugh. I kind of feel like I'd be the guy right there with the bulk out in the back, whipping his wife or something. I don't know. It's just, I had memories of doing that to my sister and such, but it's just such an interesting time where people would just walk in the water with fully clothed, like formal gear, and you got these guys just like putting out their chest, holding Pismo clams and such. It's just such interesting pictures. And I want to thank Effie McDermott for allowing me to use lots of these historic photos. It really makes the presentation better, I believe, just seeing what it used to look like back in the day. She does have a neat book you should check out. It's called Images of America, Pismo Beach. Here's another example of a historic picture. It's just full on formal gear. Like I almost just want to dress up in a tuxedo and just walk the beach with a Pismo clam shell in my hand, just see what kinds of looks I get. This is from 1906. Similar to today, hundreds of cars would line the beaches. However, at that time, most of those people in the sand were taking Pismo clams. Where today, they're taking advantage of off-roading, camping, or just relaxing and playing on the beach with the kids. During the early 1900s, thousands of people would come to the beaches and harvest as many clams as they could possibly. Really not knowing the damage they would cause in the future. We're kind of paying for now. Probably seemed like a resource that would be impossible to over harvest based on the numbers. However, today, the whole stretch of 10 miles of Pismo, Shannon, Grover Beach, it would be like winning the lottery if you could find one legal size Pismo clam. They're just all really, really little. It's getting better. Year after year, they're growing and we're getting closer and closer. Driving through Pismo Beach, I took these this week. Like if you're just coming from a different state or a different country, you would still think that this clam fishery exists. I mean, there's evidence all over town. You got these giant sculptures that are painted by a local artist, which are really neat. The one on the right of the mermaid is talking about the 75th anniversary of Pismo Beach, I believe. They still have the yearly clam festival, which I haven't been to. It's coming back this year. And then a lot of the restaurants serve really great clam chowder. A little interesting tidbit of Pismo clams. During the Great Depression, Franklin D. Roosevelt closed banks for a week in 1933. I think it was to restructure the banking system, and it took longer than they had thought. So there's a shortage of coins and currency in the 1930s. There was no money for use of purchasing goods or giving out change. So Pismo clams were plentiful, but currency really was not. And local merchants, about 12 of them, started to issue money script written on clamshells, which could be redeemed at a later date. It was kind of like an IOU, but I believe from what I've read, which there's a paper I'll mention here you can look at, it gives you more information. So the amounts were 25 cents to $20. And now this clam script is definitely worth more than $25, 25 cents. It's more like hundreds of dollars. They're pretty rare and valuable. Here's some close-ups of some clams. Thanks to the city of Pismo Beach for letting them in City Hall, especially during COVID, to hold these and take photos. There's some from like Lighters Pharmacy, the Beach Store, Restwell Cabins, Henderson's Drug. All these stores aren't here anymore, but Highway Cigar Store. This is the paper I mentioned on the bottom, the California Clamshell Script Currency of 1933 by Joshua Smith. So check it out if you're more interested. Some more close-ups, California Market. And these are my favorite. They're a little more colorful. There's $1 and a $20 one. So I believe what you would do when the vendor would give out the shell as change or currency, you would pay for it, you would write your name on the back. And then when it gets exchanged, the new person would write their name on it. So the vendor had an idea of who owed money or who was in possession of the clam script. So before we get deep into Pismo clams, I wanted to mention some other clam species that are in California. Some of the more popular ones is the geoduck, I almost say geoduck, yeah, geoduck clam that can attain sizes of about 8 pounds. They're more common in Washington and such, but they do scatter around California, mostly in Northern California, but it's probably the biggest clam in the state. It's got a long neck. It's buried really deep, like up to 3 feet. We also have the gaper clam, which is also found in protected bays statewide, but you see more as you get north. They also get quite large. The razor clam, which occurs the very southern end, is Pismo Beach, but mostly up in Northern California, like Clam Beach and Humboldt County. People also take little neck clams, which only get to about 2.5 inches. And then the bean clam, which if you're a local person, you've probably seen these out there. You can sometimes find them by pulling up a hydroid, and it just looks like a carrot top, and then there'll just be a clam attached to it, which Pismo clams also do, but it's more commonly the bean clams. And at times, the beaches will just be totally littered with these bean clams, like thousands and thousands. Just they have like a mass recruitment year. And this one picture in the bottom right was from a news article, I think it was down in Newport Beach, or just thousands of these clams that are just the size of like a quarter or so. So we're here to talk about the Pismo clam. This was quite the find from FE. I've been searching for a picture of this clam for I don't know how many years, but it's the biggest clam on record, and it happens to be a striped clam, which are even more pretty. You can see the erosion on the shell over time, but this is the biggest clam on record, 7 and 3/8 inches, weighing nearly 4 pounds, dug at Pismo Beach back in 1953 by Charles Black. So I'm pretty happy to get a hold of this picture, which I can also put in a report. So it was a neat find. So anyone that spends time on the Central Coast beaches, you possibly shuffled your feet around and come up. I've seen shells on the beach from birds eating Pismo clams and dropping them and opening them and eating them. But they come in all kinds of sizes or mostly shapes and patterns and such. And they occur from San Diego, Ventura, Monterey Bay. The banded ones, the striped ones, are about 5% of the population. It's definitely one of my my favorite looks on the Pismo clam. They're pretty easily identifiable compared to other clams. They're very symmetrical and fairly compressed, very triangular. Their shells are covered with a smooth coating, which is called periostracum. Over time, that in age, that erodes and gets worn. They have very fine growth lines, which are used for aging. And yeah, as I mentioned, they just over time they get more eroded and such. The little ones are quite a bit prettier, in my opinion. Just to further demonstrate how thick the Pismo clam shell is, I compared it to a gaper clam. The gaper clam lives its life buried pretty deep in the sediment with a siphon that's extended. They cannot retract it. The Pismo clam spends its life in shallow sand, usually like 2 to 6 inches, maybe a foot. It depends on the size of the clam. The bigger it is, the deeper it's going to go. But because they're so shallow, it really is easy to just put a fork in the sand and feel them, or shuffle around in the sand while you're walking. You just have no idea. If it's really dense populations, you'll start kicking them up and they'll start floating or start rolling away. The gaper clam is a light and more brittle shell. These are 2 shells I had were almost identical in diameter. And the Pismo clam weighed 2 times as much as the gaper clam at the same diameter. And then the side view, you can really see how thin the gaper clam is. And you see a little bit of a a hole for the siphon or an opening for the siphon, where the Pismo clam, they shut totally closed. It's super thick, 3 times thicker. It's just like almost like a rock. There's no gap for the siphon, which is short, and I'll show in a minute here. So it makes sense when you consider the characteristics, the morphology of the clam, where it spends its life. The gaper clam lives in slow, low energy, silty bays and estuaries. There's no need for the thick, heavy shell. The Pismo clam lives on exposed beaches with high wave action, has the ability to close its shell for protection so it doesn't dry out. And it can also attempt to rebury after it's gone to deeper water or rolled around and settled. The Pismo clam, which with a lot of clams, has a pair of siphons, which are tube-like structures used for bringing in water, which is the in-current siphon, and expelling water, which is the ex-current siphon. The shell is opened and closed with the adductor muscle shown in the diagram, and the shell hinges at the hinge ligament, which is pretty pronounced in Pismo clam. And the foot's fairly small, and the clam held there on the right, it's a small clam, but it's still a relatively small foot. The foot's used for movement, digging, and orientation in the sand. Pismo clam siphons are generally not visible. The first time I saw it was this year. It was at a low tide, and it was at Pismo Pier. And if you ever want to see siphons, go to the Pismo Pier pilings at low tide. They'll be in little pools, and these little siphons will be coming up. That's really the only time I've seen the siphons coming up for the most part. So if you're interested, check that out. Look for a good low tide and go to the pilings. So getting a closer view, that same day, I took some GoPro video when I was able to get some pretty good still shots to confirm, which seeing is believing. You can read literature and it can tell you that the smooth part of the siphon is the X-current, but you actually see the water coming out. It really sticks with you and it helps with identification. So the siphons are used for locomotion, reproduction, feeding. The frilly in-current siphon acts as a primary filter to prevent large materials entering the clam. The X-current siphon is smooth. I was also able to get, which was really neat, on dry sand on the bottom left, the in-current and X-current siphon. This is also a really little clam. So we were just talking about like maybe an inch long for these siphons. So Pismo clams inhabit low sloping exposed beaches with medium-sized grain. You start seeing much lower densities even on Pismo Oceano Grover Beach as you head south towards Guadalupe. If you drive on the beach, you'll start seeing the beach become a lot more sloping with denser or bigger grain sand, and you'll start seeing densities disappear. So they like this low sloping, medium grain, exposed beach, such as this one right here. You typically won't see them in protected bays and estuaries and silty sediment, but it doesn't mean it's impossible. They will be there at times. But the most productive Pismo clam areas are generally open coast with extensive upwelling that produces cool and nutrient-rich water, which is essential for phytoplankton growth and essential for Pismo clam existence. A few more examples of Pismo clam beaches. Here's Morris Strand, just north of Pismo Beach. Here's Rincon Beach, which is right on the border of Santa Barbara, Ventura counties. And back to Pismo Beach, this was during the COVID closure with no vehicles were allowed, but this is still in the area which is walking only. And this is something I've only seen in Weymouth 1923, a paper like this, like kind of the Bible of Pismo clam before recently. And they did show a picture of these, but I've never seen these on the beach. All the years just walking on the beach is just like the perfect conditions, which is a really low tide and just enough water to show these formations, which I'll show on the next slide. But I'm pointing to just all those little dots and mounds is a Pismo Pismo clam. It just would have been an opportune time if we weren't in COVID lockdowns and not really allowed to go out and do field work and such. It would have been great just to fly a drone over the whole beach and just count all these siphons. It really would have given us a good idea of how many clams we're talking about out there. So these are the formations. At first I thought they were sand dollars, but looking more closely and actually digging up, they were Pismo clams. So it just happened to be the perfect conditions where the clam was expelling the sand, which a lot of the stomach is sand, and it was just like tumbling down perfectly to make these little sand dollar formations before the tide came back in and washed away. So how are Pismo clams oriented in the sand? On the left is this really old Fish and Game, used to be called Fish and Game brochure. It's in the drawing. It's funny, the technology we have now to make graphics and such, but it's still very useful. So Pismo clams are typically live up in the mean low tide line, but surprisingly, you can find them higher than you think. You may think, oh, that sand's too dry for me to find a clam, but if you dig around a little, there is some pretty decent densities up higher. They've been found depths of 40 feet, maybe greater, but anything more than 25 feet is probably uncommon. However, people still do use scuba and free diving, and they go to beaches where it's not as much of a sloping beach, but you won't find Pismo clams at low tide up there. But if you go to deeper water, you can dive and find them. One example is down in Ventura. There's a few beaches that you're able to do this. So Pismo clams orient themselves vertically with the hinge and excurrent siphon towards the ocean. The mantle edge, which is where the clam opens, is towards the beach, with the hinge ligament at the center oriented upwards. The clams tend to situate themselves this way to filter organic material as the surf rushes back to sea. It's just nice oxygenated water that's just easier for them to collect food. So a little bit on early life history without going into detail. We don't have too much time, but some general characteristics. They're broadcast spawners, meaning that a male and female will expel eggs and sperm separately under the right conditions, such as temperature, time of the year, pH. We don't fully understand when they'll do it. They also can trigger each other with lots of other invertebrates do the same thing. The number of eggs depend on size, but past researchers have found that females can have 10 to 20 million eggs that they'll release during the year, which occurs mostly in late June through August. The larvae settle on sand after 1 to 3 months. They're planktonic. Saw a paper where they believe they mostly roll around on the bottom. Maybe they don't go too far, but anyway, it takes them a couple months to settle, and they use a byssal thread demonstrated on the right, Weymouth 1923 paper, which is just a little rope, like a grappling hook, and they'll attach to a grain of sand or grains of sand, and they're just too small to settle on their own when they're that small. But when they become bigger and heavier, they will drop down or not roll around, and they'll start digging. They become sexually mature after the first year of their life, which is really soon, approximately 1 inch in size. So the general trend in numbers statewide last couple of years, it's really the highest numbers of Pismo clams we've seen, I don't know, for decades. It's become a big deal. Lots of newspaper articles are writing about it, and it's really encouraging to see. There's all kinds of great size ranges, showing many recruitment sizes and such. This is really healthy for a fishery to see. But the historical range is from Stinson Beach, which is up by Half Moon Bay, down to Bahia Magdalena, Baja California Sur, includes some of the Channel Islands. The current populations are centered around Monterey Bay, Morro Bay, Pismo Oceano Grover beaches, Santa Barbara areas. in Ventura counties, and also in San Diego, in the southern part of the range in the state. That graph I show there in the middle bottom is just, it's not necessarily a statewide trend, but it seems like we had some really good pulses of recruits in the late 2010, 11, and then kind of went away. But then 2019, 2020, we saw huge spikes in recruitment and just tons of numbers. So as I said, there's just thousands and thousands of clams. We really don't know how many. Instead of being 4.5, 5 inches, which they should be if you want to take them legally, they're all small. And this is typically what you see out there right now, between like 1 to 3 inches. Sometimes you can find one that's really, really small. However, it doesn't mean you can't get legal Pismo clams. These were taken fairly recently. This is on the Fish and Wildlife webpage. We keep record of state records for invertebrates and fish. It's really interesting if you want to get on there and look around and see if you can break a record. But these two individuals got clams, one in Coronado Beach in 2010, one at Rincon Beach in 2014. And they ended up being almost exactly the same size. I believe that Fish and Wildlife requires 1/8 of an inch to break a record. This is more like 2 millimeters, which is just a little bit different. So they ended up sharing the clam record for now, which is actually, when, as I stated in the beginning, 7 3/8 inches is the largest one we've seen, but most likely we haven't been keeping state records since 1953. So currently, these are the proven state records. So most people use a pitchfork with multiple tines and dig parallel to the beach, walking backwards until they hit a clam of significant size. One time I did this and I actually put a tine right between my toes wearing booties, and I almost chopped my toe off, but luckily it just went right through the middle. It's just kind of great luck, I guess. But it definitely takes a little bit of experience determining if you hit a small or a large clam. The tines are spaced out enough where you can detect larger clams, but if you're at a beach where there's tons of little ones, you're going to spend a lot of time digging, looking for that big one. So you kind of got to know what a big, heavy clam feels like. Otherwise, yeah, you're just going to be wasting a ton of time. But typically, once you think you've got a legal one or close to legal, you just use your hand and dig it up. There's been other methods I've read about, like dogs dragging plows and all kinds of different forks they use with baskets on them and such. Horse-drawn plows is what they use early in the commercial fishery. Many of the pitchforks, like the one in the middle, had the clam gauge connected to it just for making it faster. This was a neat fork. I saw someone on Pismo Beach thinking maybe there was a legal clam there, so I snapped a quick photo. I'd never seen one in person. You can also dig for clams in the surf, like these two individuals on the right were doing, if you can't get there in low tide. So the commercial fishery started in the early 1900s, and they're harvested for livestock, pigs and chickens for the most part. I guess people didn't realize they were tasty clams, but before that, for thousands of years, the Native Americans harvested Pismo clams. There's evidence in Native American middens of Pismo clams, using it for tools and jewelry and such. In 1911, the Fish and Game, they've changed names a few times, required a license to sell clams so we could track the fishery. The sport bag limit went from 200 in 1911, which is way too many, 50. I mean, it kept dropping. So that was a sign of the fishery was in trouble because the effort was just too high. 1915, we allowed 50, 36 in 1921, 15 in 1927, and in 1948, the limit was 10, which is the current limit. There was various size restrictions, and 1949 is the regulation that is current as well. It's 5 inches north of San Luis Obispo, Monterey County line, and 4.5 inches south of that same line. In 1948, the commercial season closed. You can see in the graph for commercial landings, pretty consistent drop. There's a big drop in World War II when the Coast Guard closed the beaches, but it just the resource wasn't allowing for commercial harvest to continue. In 1949, there was a regulation that went in place, which should have been the case the whole way, where all undersized clams must be returned to the hole in which they were dug or in deep water. And in 1986, you can only take Pismo clams in Santa Cruz and Monterey counties from September 1 to April 30th. The recreational graph on the bottom shows Pismo Beach, and it was pretty good in the late 70s, early 80s, but it just basically collapsed in the early 1980s. And we'll talk about some reasons for that later on. In 1950, there was a clam reserve and called the La Grande Clam Preserve near Pismo Beach, and it was closed for years. And when it reopened, it looked like mayhem. There's just all those figures are just people taking clams. Johnny Fitch, 1950 paper kind of summed it up. He estimated conservatively that in the first 2.5 months of reopening a closed area to clamming, in 1949, I don't know if the dates are mixed up, but 5,000 people removed 50,000 Pismo clams per day and 2 million Pismo clams in a single year. And the disturbing part of this is just, I don't know what people were thinking back then. I think it was just a rush to get your legal clams or whatever, just fishery mentality, like get my clams before anyone else. But you'll see that all those bumps are clams that are undersized and just left there to dry up and roll around in the surf. And that was probably triggered the rule where you have to rebury the clams from which you dug them. Effie sent me this article this morning. These are kind of like the Pismo clam heroes. They would drive on the beach, and these kids would get out and spend a lot of time reburying tons of Pismo clams just to try to save the undersized ones. So back in the day, there was these giant signs. I just think this would just be amazing if we could get these back in again. I just don't think maybe they're pretty enough, or I don't know, but it's really what we need. Every time someone drives the beach, they know, like especially if the fishery comes back, they need to know the rules. This is one of them. I don't know what year this was. It looks like the 50s. Return all undersized clams to holes which they were dug. I'm sure it really did send a message. And then a lot of people's big question: how long until they're big enough to have a fishery, hopefully on the Central Coast? So based on current growth curves, this is an old growth curve. Cal Poly San Luis Obispo's got a more updated one with better techniques, and they're publishing some papers which will clarify more when we think these small clams will enter the fishery. But it looks like, according to this graph, that it's going to take 4 to 6 years for most of the clams to become big enough to legally take at 4.5 inches or 5 inches in Santa Cruz area. But the growth really does vary from beach to beach, depending on lots of factors, including available food. And the uncommon large clams, which are mostly found by the wardens because they check so many, will still take 1 to 2 years to become legal size. And up to that south minimum, north minimum. But legal clams, like I said, they can still be taken throughout the state. You just kind of got to know the secret spot. And there's still some big clams to be had, usually south of Point Conception, where these guys in the middle don't live, which is one of the factors for contributing to the collapse. But obviously humans, I think, given enough evidence that humans overharvested the population throughout the decades, some sea otter data that can eat 80 clams per day or more. And there's been lots of studies that have showed that clam populations drastically decline when otters move into an area. One study in Monterey Bay estimated that 520,000 to 700,000 Pismo clams were consumed in 1 year. So you can really see what they could do if populations increase and the clams are big enough and they're available, they're gonna get them. But also environmental factors come into play. Changes recruitment success and survival. Predation's a factor, especially when they're young. Larger waves with changing oceanic conditions with more consistent storms take away suitable habitat. And once the suitable habitat's gone, the clams move, they go offshore, and we don't really know if they survive when that happens. Human development's taken its toll, and you build a freeway on clam habitat, and it's going to change the characteristics of that beach. You put up jetties, it's going to change the characteristics of that beach. But like I said, the most obvious factor is a legal take, and it's really taken a toll, and it's a factor in preventing our clam population from growing, especially at the Pismo Beach, Morro Bay area. And with that, Matt Gill's gonna take over and talk about the challenges with law enforcement division has on trying to control legal take and give you some good insight on what's going on in the local area and what him and his crew have been observing within the last few years or more. So Matt, go ahead. I'm gonna.
All right. Can you hear me, Derek?
I can, yes.
Okay. Is the slideshow started?
Yeah, perfect.
Perfect. Okay, so my name's Matt Gill. I'm the lieutenant for San Luis Obispo in South Monterey County. I sit here and used to patrol King City area, and now I supervise both counties. One thing that we've noticed over the last probably 4 to 5 years is the Pismo clam populations have rebounded, but so has the poaching, and we have some record-breaking poaching taking place. Here's an old picture at Morro Rock with game warden checking legal-sized clams in 1959. And here, with the increased poaching of clams in recent years, poaching violations are increasingly dramatically. We'll go over some of the information here in a little bit, but we're seeing severe amounts of poaching. Knowing the severity of the poaching problem is critical to develop the effective strategies to minimize it. We're working with Cal Poly actively right now, and we're trying to find out more of that information of where are these, what's the extent of the poaching having on the population data. So Robert Hugo Moon, Dr. Ruttenberg with our department has been working, trying to figure out, okay, we have all these poaching problems, what effect is it having on the clam? And we're also finally using that data that we're gaining from these poaching issues and using it scientifically, which I think is great. So it's a good partnership that we're having among Cal Poly and our department. So some data analyst goals that we're trying to figure out. We started seeing a real big rebound of populations here on the Central Coast in Pismo in 2016. So we started writing tickets for it, finding a lot of violations. So on our citations, what we started doing is getting the date, the location, number of clams seized. As that has now progressed, we are now getting offender gender. So we're seeing if it's male or female. We're also getting zip codes to seeing if it's people from different parts of the state. That way we can also try to help educate these people coming in, if they're local people, if they're people from the Valley, people from the Bay Area, people from out of state. That way we can try to figure out how to minimize this poaching, because writing citations is one aspect, but we want to also try to help prevent that and try to get some public outreach out there. We're also putting on there the dates for everything so we can figure out when it's seasonally happening. When are we actually finding these violations? How often are we finding them? And Cal Poly is computing all this data for us, which is awesome. I just put together a spreadsheet for them, and they're putting it all together. And also where within San Luis Obispo County and statewide. So I'm compiling data from San Luis Obispo County north all the way up to Monterey and Santa Cruz County to try to figure out what the poaching strategies are and how we can help mitigate some of that stuff and what we can do going forward. Here's kind of a little reality check on what we're dealing with on the clams. 2016, that's when we started noticing it. 2017, we got a couple thousand. 2018 still stayed behind that 5,000 mark. 2019 had a little bit of a dip, I think, but 2020 was crazy. 2020 was a record year for us in San Luis Obispo County. we seized 25,165 clams in calendar year 2020, which is amazing to have. That's an amazing amount of clams to be taking out of the wildlife. And pretty much, fortunately, we were able to get all those clams. And I know a lot of people ask, what do you do with the 25,000 clams? So clams are very, for the most part, as long as their shell doesn't get cracked, and you saw how thick it is, we turn around and we bury them. So we seize them from people, we take them, and then we'll turn around and dig a hole and we'll make sure we bury them back. So we try to make sure that we save the population and put them back into there, as long as they're in good shape. And we make sure we bury them, that way seagulls or sea otters or other people don't see them and they have a better chance of survival. But 2020 and the COVID year, we weren't sure if that was an anomaly, because we've seen, 5,000 roughly, a little under that, but we had 226 citations for 25,165 clams seized, which is an incredible amount. The other thing that's very interesting about this data is Pismo Beach was closed for a lot of COVID. They ended up only opening the Pismo City Beach and the Oceano Dunes, a very minimal area. So there was only a couple miles of beach that you could actually contact people, and they were taking, within a couple miles of beach, 25,000 clams. So that's a very significant impact on the population when you're talking about thousands of clams and trying to rebound to a healthy population. The citations, so you can see the 2016, we had some citations. It wasn't a lot. 2017 bounced up to under 40, 2018 over 20, 2019 over 40, and then 2020 we had we actually had 226 citations, and you can see how many clams were on there per citation. So you're looking at each citation almost had over, roughly on average, 100 clams. So that's quite a few clams per citation. That doesn't include the warnings we're also giving. The officers give quite a few warnings, especially to the kids that are out there that think they're picking up sand dollars or they're picking up a couple clams to play with in their sand castle. We try to educate them and tell them to go bury these clams back. They're still alive and they're young, so hopefully they'll get larger and you can take them later. So there's a lot more warnings than there are citations that are issued. Typically, we're issuing citations it's because they have multiple clams, and some of these cases can be pretty egregious. So there's our citation count. You can see 2018 was a big year, drop off in 2019, and then 2020 is right back at it. So far this year, we are actually having a record-breaking year. We are beating our 2020 stats through this time. Right now through June 12th, we have 40 sites for 3,916 clams seized. That's almost a 50% increase. And we're expecting our busiest months for clam poaching and taking of unlawful clams is during the months of July and August. And if you look back to Derek's previous slides, that's typically their mating season. So you're taking clams in high amounts during the mating season, which is very unfortunate and could have a really big detrimental effect on the clam population. So you kind of see here on number of violations, on how many clams were actually seized, less than 20 clams, not very many. A lot of times when you get less than 20, if it's an adult, we're catching you early, so we don't want to sit there and wait for you to get 200 clams, because that's not good for the fishery. So if we can catch them early, we can side them out, that way we can try to stop it from getting worse. And then there's times that when we show up, people have hundreds of clams. Our largest clam case last year in 2020 actually took place in November. One person had 529 clams. So that's a lot of clams. 529 is quite a few. And so far this year, our largest case is 368. So we have quite a few large cases. And then citations by month, this is where it goes over and kind of shows you our stats of when we find, usually what we notice is the summertime heat brings everybody to the beach. So May, you start getting warmer, also summer break, and you have Memorial Day weekend, June, and then July, August, September, it's hot, people come to the beach, and a lot of people start taking clams. Whether they know it or not, everybody says they don't know it for the most part. They're not allowed to take them. They don't understand that. We've tried putting up signs, but either way, Fish and Game laws are you're supposed to educate yourself before you start taking the resource. And in June, July, August, September is when we see our largest citations and number of violations in clam seized. Usually, typically in November, December, although we had that outlier of 529 in November last year, things start to calm down. The weather gets worse on the coast, so you typically don't see a lot of people out there. And it's days of the week, as no surprise, people come over when they have time off. So Fridays it starts ticking up. Saturday and Sundays is usually our busiest days. We go out there and patrol every single day. Typically, we have somebody on the coast that goes out there and checks during low tides, high tides. It doesn't really matter. We seem to find a lot of violations either way, but the weekends are definitely our busier times. And it kind of gives you an overview of where we're finding clams and giving citations out. You can see a majority of it is in Pismo Beach area, down in that neck of the woods, pretty much that whole stretch where you can see the circles there. We have noticed an uptick in Morro Bay area and Cayucas. So there are legal clams, or not legal clams, there are clams in Morro Bay and Cayucas. Those clams up there in that area are a lot larger in size overall. You're seeing a consistently more average size of closer to 3 inches, 3.5 inches. I don't see the number of clams as much as you do in Pismo Beach. The other area that hasn't been put on here yet, because this is last year, is we are seeing them in Avila Beach now as well. We saw some in Avila Beach just last week that were being taken. The largest size there was 3 3/4, so we're getting closer. We're getting some really larger clams in some of these less impacted areas. A lot of smaller clams down on Pismo Beach right now, where the population is doing very well as far as reproducing. It gives you a little bit closer overview of where you can see the clams. Our biggest areas where we see a high impact of poaching is usually towards the pier and usually towards the entrance off of Grand. So those are kind of our big areas of where everybody congregates, and that's where there's unfortunately a heavy population of clams, right where everybody congregates. So this is the result. You end up with a lot of people taking clams. Here's some pictures. So these pictures are all from San Luis Obispo County, and majority of them Pismo Beach. You can see up in the top left corner, that's a clam that we found this year. It was almost there at legal size for 4.5 inches, still not quite legal. And then we have all these clams that you see in these pictures are undersized. Everything is undersized for down here. And these are some of the pictures that we come across that we take for evidence for the court. That way they can see how many clams were taken. These are all quite a few. We use that 5-gallon bucket that you'll see in almost everybody's truck, or that ice chest. So once we take all these clams, we snap a picture. Those buckets or those ice chests are full of water and sand. We'll throw them back in there, and then we'll drive down the beach with a shovel, and we'll start making little holes and dropping them off in the holes. That way they're covered, the seagulls aren't getting them, and hopefully they have a better chance at survival. So here's a couple more sites that were issued in cases. You can see the buckets. A lot of the times the kids' buckets will be used, whether the kids are using them or not. Typically it's not the case. Usually the parents have them, and they'll be sitting there trying to fill them up. This was one this year in the middle. Game warden was driving on the beach, saw that they were actually cooking the clams and eating them right there. So he actually contacted them, seized the clams that they had unfortunately killed, and then tried reburying the other ones. That picture on the left, that is actually an umbrella bag. That umbrella bag is full of Pismo clams. That had actually 368 clams inside that umbrella bag that they were hiding. So a lot of people know about these clams, and not everybody is honest mistake. Some people are actually out there trying to hide these. A lot of these officers, I think, who made that one where they were cooking them actively, asked them if they had any more elsewhere, and then ended up going through their ice chest and finding more clams, and they lied to them several times. So they're actively trying to go out there and make sure that this happens, to prevent doesn't happen, and we can prevent it. But at the same time, there's a lot of clams out there. It happens more frequently than not, unfortunately. Kind of some statewide information that we have available to us for violations. San Luis Obispo County by far is going to lead that. Ventura, Santa Barbara, I don't get as much information from. We didn't have previously to 2016 any sites in San Luis Obispo County. There wasn't a large clam population, so we didn't come across it. Came across a lot more bean clams during that time. But recently, you're going to see that Santa Cruz had an influx last year, but San Luis Obispo is by far leading the way and setting records in this, unfortunately. So you're seeing a large number of clams seized in the last 4 years and now 5 years. Poaching seems to be related to the human foot traffic. So like I said, Pismo, Grand Ave, that's where people can walk in easiest. So that's where we typically see the highest issues. And it's during the summer months and the weekends. Some of the things that Cal Poly brought up, a lot of this is their slides, is finding that suggests signage and outreach. And that's one thing we've been trying to do. We have a volunteer program in San Luis Obispo where our volunteers are going out there and handing out flyers about the clams and educating some people, especially some of the children that are using them. And then overall enforcement. We're trying to up our enforcement. We are shorthanded here. We have a couple vacancies. We've been trying to put schedules together to try to make sure we have coverage down there. And overall, what's the impact on these clams? I mean, you've taken 25,000 clams last year and you're already up to almost 4,000 clams this year. What is that having on the impact of the population? Are you not going to have any legal sized clams? Is the fishery going to be hurt? I mean, that's something we're trying to figure out with Cal Poly right now. So hopefully with this data, we'll be able to figure something out. So the percent undersized, I believe everything in San Luis Obispo County was undersized. I don't think we had anything that was actually a legal size. I don't think we've had a legal size in quite some time. When we write citations, for a while there, we were writing quite a few violations. So people wouldn't have fishing license, or they'd be over limit, or they'd be undersized. It's officer discretion on what they do on when they write that. So this is some data that we had. You can see it should be 100% should have been undersized. Over limit, a lot of people are over limit of their 10. I mean, when you have 300 or 400 or 500 clams, you're grossly over limit. And a lot of people don't have fishing licenses, surprisingly. Some people do have fishing licenses and they still take the clams. So kind of an interesting dynamic there and some stats. And then what can you do about it? That's one thing people always ask is what can you do to help out? So one thing you can do is you can contact our CalTip. It is a 24/7 number. You can call and leave a message. Sometimes it's answered, and if it's not, if you leave a message, just dispatcher's on the other line. You can remain anonymous if you want to. I know some people are worried that they're gonna get followed up on or something like that. We strongly suggest if you leave a phone number, that'd be great, so we can contact you to follow up and find out exactly where this poaching is taking place at or what umbrella. Last year we had some great Cal tips turned in with people that we could contact back and say, go to the red umbrella in this area, you'll see them in this ice chest, and they'd walk us right in there. And it was great. We made some huge over limit cases that way. There's also a reward system, potentially if for convictions of these crimes, of poaching crimes and polluting crimes. For some of those more tech savvy people, you can also tip 411. There's an app, a CalTip app, or a tip 411. You can text 847-411 with the quotations CalTip in your message. So it could be CalTip, people taking clams illegally off mile marker 1, and send that over, and that'll work out perfect. And this number works for anything other than clams too. If you see something while you're out elsewhere in the state, while you're out in the backwoods, or if you see someone in your neighborhood that's doing something that they shouldn't with the wildlife or the fisheries or polluting, you can contact our CalTip number, and that's the best way to try to get through to an officer and report anything you want. So that's something you could do to help enforcement out, definitely, if you're out on the beach. Additionally, bury the clams if you see the clams. We had a female 2 weeks ago that was unburying clams and actually feeding them to the seagulls. So was something we were fortunately able to stop, but there's all types of things like that. So we don't want the seagulls to get them any more than they naturally do. So people are taking them out of the sand and not reburying them. It's not good for the population either. So that's another citation and violation that Derek alluded to that we have written before. But for the most part, if you guys have any questions, you can type them in the chat, and I'm going to kick it back to Derek.
All right. Can you just confirm that the slide's back on?
Yep, I can see your slide.
Excellent. So just trying to wrap it up here, a few more slides. Fish and Wildlife did monitor this fishery quite a bit when there was a fishery. They did yearly transects, extensive creel census, with just asking anglers questions. How long were you clamming? How many did you get? They measure them and such. You get updates on catch per clammer and tracks and predicts the health of the sport fishery. I hope I'm that guy on the right someday, because that looks really relaxing and fun. Just to be so exciting to bring a fishery back to the area and be able to measure big clams like that and have a healthy, sustainable fishery where everyone's responsible and taking the bag limit and following the rules. The Fish and Wildlife does do some monitoring, sporadic monitoring in Santa Barbara County, San Diego, and Pismo Beach. More yearly monitoring at Sunset Beach and Monterey Bay, but it is sporadic. It's not the most important fishery right now to the department. It's just, hopefully it becomes more important, but I mean, it's really law enforcement, unfortunately, that's regulating and managing this fishery, because everything's little for the most part. But we have done some good surveys and Rincon and such, collected some great information, but Cal Poly San Luis Obispo has been doing extensive monitoring from Mexico to Monterey Bay since 2018 or earlier, get sizes and density. It's definitely the most comprehensive monitoring for decades. And they have some pretty dedicated grad students, and led by Ben Rettenberg. Marissa Bills is the new grad student that you might see out there on the beach digging up in the sand. They're currently publishing some papers on population, aging, gonad index, and correlations to sediment size, and a lot more. And they have a current tagging program that they're going to be starting here in this month, and they're putting QR codes on them. So if you do happen to see a clam with a QR code on it, you can scan it with your cell phone. It'll take you to a page, and you'll be able to record the size of the clam, take pictures, time, all kinds of great information. So it's kind of a neat way to track growth and movement and the population of the study. So look out for that. And I think they're going to be posting flyers and such. Other researchers doing some work. Concordia University in Irvine is looking at density more in the south, LA and San Diego County, doing some movement studies. The Channel Islands National Park Service does yearly monitoring at the islands, mostly subtitle on scuba or snorkeling. And then, like Matt had talked about, we've been recently trying harder to educate the public more by putting out signs during high traffic weekends. We had these out for Memorial Day, and the outreach project did a great job just scattering these signs around in Spanish and English to just kind of tell people that there are rules and you need to follow the rules and rebury the clams and such. We created this poster recently, which you might have seen at the entrances, in Spanish and English, that talk about the regulations and a little bit of information. State Parks has recently created this great poster, and I haven't seen it yet. I believe it's in their kiosk at Pier Avenue. I could be wrong. I'm a big proponent of huge signs, but I just know this would work. But I'm just very hopeful. I dream of huge signs at the entrances, but I think this would do the huge trick. But there's another one there just talking about the limit and the rebury undersized clams. But I think what we're doing is a good step forward, and we might have to create more permanent signs in the future, especially just all the beaches. And I think it's possible we can do it, and I think the public's really going to appreciate it. We increased public interaction with our outreach project and Berber project, and in coordination with law enforcement. A lot of times we were stopping kids. They just have no clue that they're digging clams and they're making sandcastles with their little clam friends and not reburying them. Happened quite a bit. So I don't think the wardens really want to have to stop for every kid digging in the sand, unburying clams. So the final question, can Pismo clam fishery return to the Central Coast? I think absolutely. not 90% sure. It depends on a lot. Illegal take. Each mature poached clam can equate to 10 to 20 million eggs per year. This is my calculation, but if you multiply that by 22,000 mature clams, it's really a big number, 220 billion to 440 billion eggs a year, which it's a lot of potential for bigger clams to grow up to legal size. So it's significant. The sea otters, as sea otter population increases and the clams get larger, they're going to start predating on the clams again. Literature says if the otters are here, they're going to eat them, but I don't know. We'll see. Environmental factors, of course, temperature, wave action, sediment loss, pollution, and then we need more public education, and the public just needs to care more about it. People that come to the beach just need to know the rules and to really care about the resource. And last slide here, I'll wrap it up. How to find out more about Pismo clams. I've currently written a draft enhanced status report. The website's marinespecies.ca.gov. You'll be able to find all kinds of great information on all the managed species that Fish and Wildlife manages. And Pismo clam will be on that list here very soon. That went over CalTip, which I don't need to go over too, but it's good for you to see it again. And I just want to give a shout out to Hugh Hauser. He did an episode on Pismo clams, episode 5003. You can go check it out on Chapman University website, but just wondering where those costumes are now. But it's actually a really fun, interesting video. FE, who supplied a lot of these photographs, I believe, is on there and coordinated with them. I'd have to watch it again. I just met her on email. But with that, Kristen, we can take some questions, or if we have time. I know we're near an hour, but that's it.